Here we go. We're live, Leonardo.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Tabitha. Hi. I'm just going to introduce briefly the new center, and Mohammad and Patrick, we're gonna be in charge of these. Well, Patrick and Mohammad, both with glasses. The one with the Salemy, and the other one is Patrick Schabus. And first of all, I would like to say thank you, especially to Mohammad and to the new center, to put together with these great courses. I hope, and we are very excited because of the lineup, the topic, etc., and also that you guys decided to attend also the theory course. Important, and with the discussion really to the next level. So first, I introduce you to Mohammad and Patrick, and then they will take over. So Mohammad is an independent curator, critic from Iran. He has curated exhibition at the Kerner Gallery and AMS Gallery at the University of British Columbia, as well as the Satellite Gallery and Database. He co-curated thesis exhibition at the Morris and Helen Belkin Art Gallery. In 2014, Mohammad organized the Incredible Machines Conference in Vancouver, and he holds a master's degree in critical and curatorial studies from the University of British Columbia. Then he is artist, filmmaker, and curator who holds an MA in visual arts from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, work at HKW in Berlin, Ars Electronica, Kunstlerhaus in Vienna, and the Grazer Kunstverein. Sorry for my German pronunciation. Schabus films have been shown in international film festivals like Anifilm, Animex, and Animateca, Biennale, and the Vienna Independent Film Festival. His writings have been published in Engagé, Malmo, and Art Magazine CC. From 2015 to 2018, he was the director and curator of the Madelkern project, and in 2017, he was awarded the Honorary of Fine Arts Vienna. I hope I didn't forget anything from your bios. I'm sure you're gonna get acquainted now with all our fellows, and I hope you will enjoy the course. And now I'm gonna leave you to leave one extra spot for a fellow to join. Bye-bye. See you guys.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's us now. So let's talk a little bit about what are we going to be doing in the next, this session and 8 more. Actually, the seminar was going to be only 8 sessions, but we extended it for 1 more session because I really want to make sure that we produce something in these 9 weeks. But we get to that a little bit later. So what I try to put together in these 9 sessions is basically an introduction to the field of theory, mostly in what we call epistemology, and try to understand sort of like what are the leading theorists and philosophers of our time are talking about when they're dealing with our contemporary time, particularly in relation to the rising importance of technologies and what people have termed planetary computation, planetary scale computation, technosphere, and many hosts of other words that can describe our current moment. And our introductory 2 mini lectures, which me and Patrick will give, will sort of like begin this inquiry, and hopefully with the addition of other people that we've selected to be in this seminar, we will get closer to seeing how other people look at this problem from many different point of views. To add to this, I would like to say what we want to do is, in terms of your role, it should be more than just coming here and watching television and like looking at us. And there's ways to engage you. We formalize the system to engage you, which will be basically every week, except the first and the last. So for the next 7 weeks, at least 2 people will make presentations on the main text that is provided to you by the instructor of the day or the instructor of that seminar session, right? And you've already received the text for the next week, which is Reza Negarestani's text and also his references. So every person who I've invited to teach this is going to provide us a title and a short description for their presentation and one main text of theirs, which sort of like crystallizes what they're going to lecture about, and then 2 reference texts that they've used or have inspired them to do their work. So, and then what will happen is, for instance, today, before we get into anything, we would select the 2 people who will be reading and presenting on Reza Negarestani's work. And then on top of those 2 people, we will get 2 other people to also respond to those presentations. And of course, you're not going to know exactly what those presentations are prior to the class unless you take the effort of contacting the person who is paired with you and sort of like work together so they can maybe share notes with you and tell you what they're going to say. But even if they don't, all you need to do is read the material, but maybe not as in-depth as the person who's presenting, and then form opinions on the spot, make notes, and sort of like do a shorter presentation. So shorter response. So if the presentation is about 10, 15 minutes, the responses are like 5 to 7 minutes, right? So we basically will have to pick these people today. So that's 4 people, right? 2 people responding on Reza's text and 2 people responding to those 2 respondents, right? So every week we will have 4 people getting involved and talking, right? Of course, this is to make sure that there's enough engagement, but it's also there to basically give you a methodology of how to form opinions on sort of like theoretical matters. Anybody comes in, I would like to mute them because, okay, no, it's cool. And also developing presentational skills, like skills to basically talk without notes or from reading or combination of the 2, and basically be comfortable with podiums and also like this very medium of video, right? And then hopefully we'll create something together at the end, which I'm about to explain what I'm thinking of doing. So that's clear, right, of how the classes will unfold, right? So Reza will give a lecture, right? And then those 2 people will each one presents on Reza and one responds to the presentation, and then the second person presents on Reza, and then the second respond, right? That's how we're going to go about it, right? And then that will generate something for the rest of the class to be talking, right? Now, what I really think is important to do is to basically keep a notebook or a digital notebook as you go through these readings. Whatever comes to your head is basically already your response to what you're reading, and take note of it. This is how great writing always begins. You're always writing by responding to things you hear or you see or you read. And if you record it, that's the beginning of good writing. You know, people usually like sit in front of an empty computer screen and say, oh, I have to write, I don't know what to write. It's like, that's the worst method to begin writing. The best way to begin writing is already having some responses to something, a talk you went to, a book you read, something like that. So as you read this material, take notes, because those notes will become the beginning of what you're going to do in terms of, especially if you're responding for those weeks, right? So basically there's about 15 people in a class and 7 people. So it's okay. People will do 2 presentations and 2 responses basically throughout this 9 weeks, right? And that's in addition to hopefully a final project that I would want you to engage and do. Now, any question until now? Okay, so I'm just gonna like go through this like paperwork part, which is like really sets the ground for like what we'll be doing here together. Okay, so what I'm thinking of doing is, and this is something that I already have exercised once in 2015. It was like a piece I developed for eFlux, and you must have received it in an email yesterday. It's called Art After the Machines, right? Now, the content of that has a lot to do with art, but actually this particular seminar, we don't really have to talk that much about art unless you really want to like address art. This is more about sort of like sociology. It's more about sociology, politics, about anthropology, about philosophy, more about these. Oh my God. Okay. A friend you haven't heard from in like 8 years decide to call you like right this moment. You know, it's like seriously, last time I saw this friend was 2010 in New York. Anyways, so yeah, so basically, and if you look at the text I sent you, it's basically a cohesive piece of text that I put together, but it actually was developed out of copying and pasting a long conversation I had on Facebook with a group of people whose names are mentioned in the first paragraph. And basically, after this conversation ended, which was like when I called it, okay, it's over, thank you, I copy pasted the entire conversation out of a Facebook chat, a Facebook multiple chat, brought it into Word, and then started playing with it and completely changed the context, changed the negative to positive, positive to negative, took things out of context, just and developed it into one cohesive piece of text and gave it its voice. But the material for it was not mine. It was all those stuff said in that article was already bits and parts collected by other people. I just basically put them together, and whichever thing I agreed with, I left it as it was. And if I didn't agree with it, I manipulated it to say the opposite of it, or use other form of strategies in order to use that material in order to make my own statement. I added very little of my own writing at the end. Any of my own writing was already in the chat, which I was like maintaining with this group of people over a course of few months, right? So I'm hoping that we can maybe develop a collective text together at the end, right? Something that all of us can call ours, but it's actually nobody's, and it actually contradicts itself. And basically, it goes with the spirit of what me and Patrick will be talking about later, which is like something that stands somewhere between fiction and real, somewhere between truth and lie, somewhere between objective and subjective, somewhere between language and mathematics, between communication and language, right? Between numbers and letters, between all these sort of categories, right? If we can do that, that would be lovely, because not only we can be proud of this 9-session seminar, but actually Digital Earth would love to post that on their website and sort of like show that like we actually developed something. We also have a project in mind for the art class that we'll be doing with artists and art practitioners, but that's a completely different group project. It's more like an exhibition, and we talk about it Thursday when we meet. But for this class, I was thinking maybe something along this line. There's also the possibility of somehow inserting this in a very sort of like a hacking manner into other existing platforms like Wikipedia and all sorts of stuff, that a technologist who is affiliated with the New Center is thinking of ways in which this project, this final project of ours, can be inserted into existing systems of sort of like information and knowledge out there. But we can discuss that later. So yeah, so and if you guys want to like rethink what I said and come up with better ideas of how we can do it together, totally open to it. And maybe we should really like think about that to finalize what we do in the beginning of next session, right? And then somehow carry through. My gut instincts tell me the best thing is that you people start taking notes and writing things and putting things down in a Word document or in a cloud, on a Google Doc, or on a spreadsheet, Google spreadsheet or something, and keep collecting interesting stuff. And basically, the best way maybe to go about it is to those people you start to investigate because you're presenting on, and their ideas will be the best way if you don't have any other thing you want to like write about, because you have to do this kind of work for the seminar. Maybe that will be the good starting point. As you read their works and make commentary about it, you would expand it a little bit and research a little bit more and bring things in, and then maybe we can start that way. But the idea is to basically rewrite existing material and rewrite it in a way that it basically develops some kind of half-truth or myth or some kind of like fantastical / real entity that make people go like, is this really real? You know, something like that. That's the sort of like thing we're thinking of. And if you had time to read those texts we send you, you would see why we think this is important and why this would be a fruitful exercise. Okay, so I think I've covered a little bit of what I wanted to say. Now, before we ask questions, on the screen from my right to left, I'm going to call your name and ask you to maybe introduce yourself. This must be the first time some of you are meeting, right? Because I don't think there's been any forum like this for you, the recipients of this residency, to meet. So it would be great for you to actually talk and see each other. So I'm going to start from Umber. Go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Umber Majid. I am a visual artist primarily, but I have a research-based practice, and I mostly work with Pakistani state and family archival materials to speculate kind of other futures. My most current project is on the nuclear history of Pakistan, which I developed recently, and throughout the next 6 months, I'll be developing a new project around to revive my uncle's, maternal uncle's failed tourism company that existed in Pakistan in the early 1990s. And yeah, so that's basically what I'm here to do, and very nice to meet you all.
You mean to revive it fictionally, right?
Yes, fictionally, and hopefully through kind of the digital interface. So potentially developing an app, a walking tour app on a site in Pakistan called Beria Housing Authority, which is a ancient Egyptian themed gated community. So very strange, yes.
Lovely, thank you very much. Tekla, do you mind taking over? And unmute yourself, please.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm Tekla Aslanishvili. I'm an artist, filmmaker, and I also write occasionally and also create. I'm mostly working on the themes of urbanism, digital infrastructures, and smart cities. And currently I'm working on a documentary film which is following the processes of developing the smart city and the deep sea port, which is aimed at mapping Georgia at the like to turn Georgia into logistics hub. But I'm interested in observing these processes from future perspective, because like nothing yet is there. So, but this like digital future is already shaping the lives of people and like how everything looks. So this is what I'm doing now.
And you're right now in Tbilisi, right?
Yes, I'm in Tbilisi. I work in Berlin basically, but this project is in Tbilisi, and I'm from Tbilisi. So for now, I'm here.
It would be good if you can talk about the physical location you occupy in the moment, because it help people place you. And Umber, maybe you can just like supplant us with your location, because I forgot to ask you.
Oh, sorry, and I forgot to even mention it. I work between New York and Lahore, Pakistan. So currently I will be in New York, and then in the upcoming months I'll be staying for a couple of months in Pakistan.
Yeah, your door is very New York.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. I know that. I know that doors. Brooklyn, I know those doors.
Very Brooklyn.
Yeah, totally. Okay, Tabitha, do you want to take over and tell us a bit about yourself? Okay, I guess we're just going to wait for Tabitha and go to Sepide. Sepide, please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, I'm Sepide and I'm from Iran. Currently, I'm in San Francisco. I'm an architect, and also recently I'm working on videos and making digital art. My project is on the degenerative process, and I'm going to start with the questioning about like the concept of time and how it relates to our understanding from world, and how yeah, so that's like my main research basically. Yeah.
Okay, lovely.
Yeah.
I guess we have to skip Pete because Pete's microphone doesn't work. So next will be to go to Ming. Go ahead.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Because Pete cannot talk, but we actually work together. I'm Min. I'm Min Shenxie actually, but you can just call me Min. And actually, my working partner is Pete. So basically, we got a architectural background. I used to be an architect, but now we're actually turned into the virtual world because basically in the contemporary architectural theory that following the cybernetics and the cyberspace, and we actually foresee a future for architecture that probably most of the parts will actually exist in the virtual world. So we are doing a lot of like what we call people will say it's mixed reality artwork, but we will actually call it multi-reality artwork because we mix the physical stuff by using scanning, similar technology, but with the virtual stuff and also some fictional stuff. And so that's how we actually create this kind of, we call it multi-reality experience. Trying to through this way to speculate the future and also connect to the past and also maybe what you will say the myths from the past, from the local, and so that's basically what we are doing now. And our actually our group is called Hyperbation. So yeah, that's it, I think. Thank you.
Do you mind telling us a few words about Pete? Because I don't want to like subject him to like typing something on the side and all that and read it. So do us a favor and introduce Pete as well a little bit. We're working together.
Okay. So Pete is also actually was educated in architecture school in Architectural Association in London. So it's a very experimental school, and so that's how we actually started to work together, because we were in different architectural schools, but both of us actually coming to the virtual side of architecture, and that's how we actually work together. And in our working method, actually Pete is more responsible for the artistic style and also the art theory, and I'm working more on the technical part of it, and also the technical theory.
Lovely.
I hope that's enough. Yeah.
Jeremiah, do you want to take over? Oh, sorry, Ming, you never told us what city where you were in.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I forgot that. Basically, I'm currently in Sichuan, and Pete is currently in Beijing. But we will actually meet together in Dunhuang, and we will conduct our work in Dunhuang, and later in Beijing, and then in Chongqing. It's basically 3 cities that are not that common. Or maybe Beijing is very popular to the foreigners, but Dunhuang and Chongqing are actually a very different city than the Shanghai, this kind of international cities. They got a very I would say distinct style in terms of the space and the culture. So we would like to bring this to the contemporary stage, basically.
Thank you. Jeremiah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremiah, and I'm based in Lagos, in Nigeria. I'm an artist, and I work with photography and new media. And my project at the moment is I'm working on the visualization of data through images and sound and.
Sorry, you said visualization of?
Visualization of data.
Data, okay. Data visualization, okay.
Yeah. Using medium, the media that's closest to me, photography, video, and at the moment, 360 video. And the main context of the project is to document the developing cultural and socio-economic relationship between Africa and Asia that's burgeoning. And I'm using Lagos, where I live, as a case study for this.
Okay, so I'm just like curious, and I hope I'm not taking too much of your time, but just what do you mean? Because photography and video already, it's a visualized data. So it's like, I'm curious to see what's your process? How do you consider visual data as raw data and then develop other stuff with it? I don't know if you want to like give us some clues or not, but it will be interesting.
And this is what I mean, it's a research-based project, and this is what I'm trying to find out. Apart from photography and video, as you rightly mentioned, there's also real data on ground. I mean, like the amount of vessels that go through the port, the amount of, and also the place where the project would be is actually new. It's the first free seaport in Nigeria, so it's going to be like a hub for huge commercial activities. This is the first time I'm doing something like this, and this is also a bit challenging for me. But I hope to be able to have some animated GIFs and also some animated images.
No, I'm asking because we're thinking of with Moses, we're thinking of something similar for the final project of the art class, like some kind of like an online, I hate to say online exhibition because we all know how boring that it is, but an online display of visual data. So yeah, so you might find something interesting in the Thursday seminars that will relate to what you're doing, and you might be actually able to help us and the rest of the class to try to figure something out. We've been like brainstorming and working with this fellow technologist at the New Center, Valentin. But yeah, we might be able to help each other. Okay. So the next will be Ishita. If you can get closer to your microphone compared to the last time you spoke, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me better?
Yes, much better.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Ishita, and I'm based out of New Delhi, India. I'm collaborating for this particular project with someone called Khyati, who's an architect based in Washington, and she has work right now, so she couldn't come for the class. So we've been talking over the last few months and creating some work around looking at a state called Gujarat in India. Gujarat is a coastal state with very high levels of industrialization, and our project focuses on Kutch, which is a district which borders Pakistan. And we're sort of interested in exploring looking at what the infrastructural architecture of the coastline, and also then looking at the experiences of pastoral and fishing communities that have traditionally occupied these regions. And we're also sort of interested in looking at like the aesthetics of satellite imagery, particularly in terms of how it plays out in context of the maritime and the desert borders, because this entire area is also very ecologically fragile. And the sort of relationship between India and Pakistan and how it manifests itself in these border regions is something we're interested in looking at. And we'll be mostly doing it through oral narratives, through looking at interviews, as well as through looking at data that's produced by infrastructure companies. So for example, blueprints, environment assessment reports, official documents by infrastructure companies, and sort of interspersing and playing with both of them. My arts practice has mostly been around illustration and graphic comics, but we're looking at exploring different mediums now. Since Khyati is also an architect, it's about like what we end up doing together.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we should go to Imo, if that's the correct way of calling you. Okay, we don't hear you because you actually,
Done, I think.
There we go.
Yeah. So my name is Emo, not Emo.
Emo.
It's pronounced Emo.
Apologies.
No problem. I'm an artist, both Beninese and French. And I've been working, so I'm living and working in between Paris and Cotonou in Benin. And right now I happen to be in London because at Somerset House, because I'm participating in 154, the African Art and I have I'll be in London. That's very good because I have a solo play opening in London this Saturday. And basically, what I'm interested in generally is transculturality, transculturalness, or whatever, meaning as a model opposed to universalism, transculturalism. And what else can I say? The project I want to do for Digital Earth is I'm following a specific smartphone, which is one of the building bricks of the digital civilization, so I think you might call it that, from Shenzhen to Lagos. So I think I will meet with you, Jeremiah. It's very likely. And so what could I say? Yeah, I mean, actually, I looked at the syllabus, and I thought that I would be interested in presenting Barthes, Roland Barthes, the text, because I guess I will be able to pronounce all the French things right.
Awesome, thank you. Just one thing about the background noise, that like we all heard your background noise, which is fine. It's our first session. We're still like you guys are medium. There's this tool to the left called Control Room. If you actually download and install it, there's ways. I mean, I should have used that, I guess, right?
Yeah, but his noise was as loud as his speech. Therefore, the control room can't.
Okay, yeah. There's ways to, and then they can control their own control room, right?
Yeah.
I think when I click on that, I get a message saying you're in a moderated video call.
Oh yeah, totally. So what I was gonna say is like I will try to use this tool to reduce your background noise, and sometimes it interferes with your voice. I just didn't want to do it, but there is this tool, and I wish they would allow people to control their own. I thought you can control yours, but you can't, right?
No, that you can control your microphone, but that would be on the hardware. That
yeah.
Would be,
yeah.
Yeah. Let me see.
Okay, last Asia, go ahead. I mean, Tabitha still hasn't spoken, but like I'm going to give it another try. Go ahead, if you can. Yes, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Asia. I'm an art historian from Ukraine. I'm currently in Kiev, Ukraine. And together with my collaborator, who is not here but part of Digital Earth, her name is Solveig Sus. She's a filmmaker. So together we make this project called Geocinema. And what we do, we are looking at planetary scale networks of sensing, such as satellites, CCTV cameras, cell phones, what have you. So we look at all of those as largely distributed cinematic apparatuses. And our project presupposes a series of cinematic investigations and a method that we want to test out in different geographies. And for the Digital Earth part of our research, we are relocating to China to conduct a research on basically recursive processes of between large-scale projects such as Belt and Road, and also image making, and also big data policy, and also how all of those affect the terraforming processes.
Lovely. Sounds very interesting. It's sort of like I wrote a short piece a few years ago, actually 2014. It's already been 4 years. That was published by Brooklyn Rail called Cinema After. No, it wasn't called Cinema After Anthropocene. It was called Post-Anthropocene, Post-Anthropocinema, or something like that. It was after Anthropocinema, yeah, which talked about like how cinema have to like abandon human as the maker and as the subject and as the viewer, and how cinema is kind of like expanding into other forms of sort of like delivery and other forms of what does it do, other forms of ontology. And I'm very interested in your project because currently me and Patrick are working on a film. So we're editing, we're in an editing stage of a film that is trying to sort of like, I mean, it's completely a different topic, but the filmmaking method might interest you because what we're doing is very much trying to like move away from a linear editing process and kind of like a distributed type of cinema, not expanded, but mostly like distributed cinema with many different types of footage being kind of like used and incorporated into many different screens. So yeah, it would be good to continue this conversation.
Well, if you could share your text from Brooklyn Rail and
that's totally online. I'm the person who coined this term, anthropocinema. So if you just put Salemy anthropocinema, it'll come up. Because I don't think anyone has used this term the way I used it in 2014. It's still like, I think it's 1 or 2 or 3 references to this word in the entire Google. So even if you just put anthropocinema, I think the text will come up because it's online. Now, another thing is that it's very important that you all use your news center email and kind of like learn how to log into the Google Classroom, because that's where essentially you will find the folders where all the readings and stuff for this class and the other class are saved, right? And you received an email earlier today that explained to you how it works. You have to use your news center email, like log off your regular. Here in these classes, you can come with either of your main Google account or any other Google account or your news center account. And we don't try to enforce using the news center email to come in, because sometimes people just are like too busy to log off and log in. But for the material in the classroom, it's like, it's not our decision. Google only allows those who have an institutional email to use that platform. And it's unfortunately, we can only allow you access with your news center email, which you all should have already received. So basically you log out of your regular, thank you. You log off your regular Gmail, and then you log into that Gmail, and then you go in and you make sure that you can go to use the classroom code to subscribe to the class. And basically that's it. You go to the classroom.google.com. Make sure you do that at some point today during the class while you're like being distracted, or right after the class, and get back to me and Razwan if you have any problem, because it's super important that you have access to all the material. And then Google Classroom is actually a very good place to keep some of your notes, post your texts, and we can totally utilize Google Classroom towards the final project that we want to do together, right? So it's important that you make sure you're logging in and you're connecting to Google Classroom for the basic procedures of the class to happen properly. Now, before anything else, what do you people think if we take a look at the instructors list and talk about who wants to respond to who? Because it takes about 10-15 minutes, maybe a little bit more. You have the list of people who are going to be your instructors. If you don't, I can post it to the sidebar here. For those who are not in the room, using the phone, it should be very easy to access it. And the reason why, even if we don't decide, I think a little bit of discussion about it today will be good, because then at least I can answer your question about these people and their work if you're unclear. Those of them who have provided us the materials are already in a Google Classroom. But sometimes people are not so fast or not so good with deadline. So some of the people have yet to send their materials, right? So I'm going to paste the name of the people that you'll be looking at, and here we go. Oh, maybe I just did a wrong thing. Okay, I just posted our bios. Sorry about that. For some reason it didn't come through. Okay, sorry. Okay. Here we go. So next week, we begin with Reza Negarestani, the Iranian philosopher. So can we at least get 2 people and 2 respondents for that? So then we can just file that to the side and get deep into the lecture, or the lecture part of the day. Who would like to put their name forth to do Reza's paper? And the paper's already emailed to you, and also it's in a Google Classroom. I see Sepida getting really excited. No? So we really have to at least figure out next week's, if not more. And if you guys don't pick it, I'll just have to assign you. So, because we can't just sit here forever and look at this, because the time will run out. And
Reza is too tough in terms of writing. And also, like, I have other preferences, Patricia Reed. So, but
okay, that's good. If you're going Patricia Reed, just put your name down right now with Patricia. So then we start collecting these names, and then I can transfer these into the file and remind everyone, and then we all know what we're doing. So, but I'm looking for 2 people who would respond to Reza next week, foremost. So I can maybe put. Okay, that's good. You can pick another person too, or actually you have to pick another person. So brace yourself for another name.
Okay.
Are you guys familiar with Alexandra Mason? She is a key figure of the collective Anon who wrote the Alt Woke Manifesto last year, and it kind of like went viral. We published it at the News Center, and it kind of went viral and got quoted by so many people. And she's kind of like basically found herself with a bit of a reputation around this very urgent call to how politics are different in the age of Trump, and how art and technology can help develop a new approach to politics for the left. If you look up Alt Woke Manifesto, you will see it. She's actually coming to both Prague and Berlin in October. I'm inviting her here in Berlin for a talk, and she's going to also to Prague to work with the Prague Art Academy and TBA 21 Foundation for another similar talk in Prague. So Sepida, I have to put your name down for Reza, because I know you're familiar with his work, and you'll be the best person. One of the 2 people next week is you. So I'm gonna put Sepida Negarestani, but I still need 1 more person for. Okay, lovely. Those people.
I'm sorry. Can you put me down for Katerina?
Okay, so that was Umber, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Umber, pick another person too.
Okay, just give me 1 minute.
It's just a paperwork side. Okay, Jeremiah, Reza, lovely. Okay, so Jeremiah, I'm your sort of like help with Patrick. If you have any questions while you're reading and developing your presentation, we're with you. I don't say that to Sepida because Sepida is very familiar with Reza, and I think Reza will be one of her, what do you call it, tutors? You guys call them tutors, right? Yeah, so you're familiar, but also if you need help, I'm there to sort of like facilitate your understanding of the material. Also, not just for Reza, but for all of the other ones. In between days, between 2 classes, we'll be there to help you with any of the material. So any other name we can get. Okay, me, you, lovely. So Umber, thank you so much for giving us your 2.
Mohammad, can I quickly ask something?
Yes.
Is the place where all the texts are located? Because
Yes.
so far I only have the first week.
Yes.
Texts.
You know, as I said, we're gathering them and putting them in a Google Classroom. And every week we send you like a week prior, we send you the material for next week. But if you want to begin working on this stuff,
yeah.
Let me see, who did you pick?
I picked Patricia and Inigo Wilkins.
I think both of 2 already have given our material, and their material's on the drive. So you just have to log in with your name to the News Center account and go to the classroom, and you have access to them.
So it's not on the drive because the drive is empty. So it's on the main side, right? On the dashboard.
Are you sure it's empty? Because I was there earlier and it was. Are you in the classroom?
In the classroom, in the Google Drive. Yeah.
Yeah. the Google Drive of the classroom, not your Google Drive.
No, of the classroom.
Okay, if it's not there, I'm going to ask Razvan to make sure that everyone has access to it, because we double checked and it was there. But by tomorrow morning, everything will be there, okay?
Cool, thanks.
Okay.
I also have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So my situation is also a bit problematic. I told it to Leonardo. Like for the first 2 months, I will have to go to Anaglia, and although it's going to be a smart city, there is no internet connection. I have very bad internet connection. So, and I don't know like which days exactly I'm going to be there. So I think I will be forced to like randomly choose something when I will be here. So I think, so my question is like this list, how is it listed here? Is it according to, like for example, Alexandra Mason is like in the last, like is it in December or November or?
Well, you know what? I could have copy pasted the dates too, but I just tell you now what are the dates. Okay. Alexandra Mason is November 27. Katerina Kolozova is November 20th. Patricia Reed is November 13. Boris Ondreička is November 6th. You is October 30th, and Inigo is October 23rd, and Reza Negarestani is October 9th.
Okay, so it's like list like that. Okay, then I will put it. Do I have to put it now, or can I do it later?
You can do it later, but I really prefer if people will put it now, because it just make it easier. But I needed 2 people for Reza tomorrow for next week, and I got it. And now I only need 2 respondents to Reza. And those, if you got those, tell me. I'm just gonna pick randomly people, because there's not much work. It's just like a very rudimentary engagement with his work, and then mostly listening and responding spontaneously to people who present, right? So who wants to respond to next week, Reza, and to...
just one question. I don't know if you can hear me with the background noise.
Yes, no, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is, when is this, the session, the session you're referring to? It's 1 week from now, exactly?
1 week from now.
Exactly.
2 hours earlier, because we changed the time to accommodate people in China.
2 hours earlier, so that would be Tuesday, 2 hours earlier. Yeah.
For you, instead of 5 p.m., it will be 3 p.m., right? Because you're in London. If you're in London,
no, I'll be back in Paris.
Okay, so it'll be 4 p.m. rather than 6 p.m. Yeah.
Okay. I'm writing it down. Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay, so we would write down you for responding to Reza's presentation.
Okay.
And another person, please.
Can I be the respondent?
Okay, good. So, okay, so our sort of like process here is also we post these sidebar notes to the classroom. So use it during the class to sort of like take notes, share links with people. You know what I mean? The class can have 2 channels. One is the live talking and the video, and then the other channel is the text on the sidebar. So if you start posting anything there, it's absolutely fine. And we usually select all and post it, because as strange as it sounds, Google has no system for preserving what we type on the sidebar here. If I don't save it, it's all lost. So normally I copy paste this into the classroom, and I call it the sidebar conversation belonging to this particular session. And then it's good, because if you leave like names of people or links or something, people can later access it, okay? So I'm using the sidebar note here as just like a place to put notes, and then I'm gonna like organize it. And all of this will be available in a spreadsheet to all of you by if tomorrow, not the next day. So then you see your commitments you've made, and you see all the commitments. So everybody's on the same page, okay?
Just one question I wanted to ask. I don't know if you could hear me a moment ago, but
yes.
I said that I would be interested in presenting the Barthes text.
Because we already got 2 people for Reza, but I wrote you down for responding.
No, I understand. I was referring to the text by Roland Barthes from Mythology.
Oh, okay, sure. If you want to do that.
Yes. So I would like to present this one.
Okay, so your presentation will be the last presentation on the last day of the class in December, because that text belongs to me and Patrick, right? So we will book you. So you will have plenty of time till December 4th, right? And you can respond to it. Okay, there it is. But do you want to respond to Reza also tomorrow, next week? Since I made the mistake of putting your name down.
It's okay. I don't mind.
It's not too much of a challenge. You have a rudimentary engagement with his work, but mostly you take notes while the person is presenting, because you're mostly responding to one of your colleagues who just presented on something. It's about spontaneous formation of opinion and formalization and presentation of it rather than anything else, you know?
Fine.
Whereas the presentation is about like a deeper engagement with the text and forming more solid and more formalized opinions, right? So this one is an easy one, but I think both of them are kind of like important.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah, lovely. Okay, so maybe we can now, any other question you guys have? If there's any questions about what we're doing, I turn the video off for a sec. Okay, so if there's no question, I would like to sort of like begin the, okay, I also have to send this link to a guest we have in the class to prepare him for coming. He was the co-author of one of the texts that I will be presenting, or sort of like is a major point I'm trying to make today. So I'm going to ask him to join us. Okay, here we go. Now, I'm going to put Emo on mute also, so there's less noise coming in, and also Asia on mute. Wow, that was interesting. Because I don't even know where it's coming from. Okay. So my main concern, since I basically became active again in the affairs of the art world and in the affairs of basically knowledge production, has to do with the impacts of digital technologies and what we call planetary computation on a range of things and subjects, including human subjectivity, politics, economy, production of art, production of knowledge. I've been deeply looking at these questions since I went back to grad school for my master's in curatorial studies. In grad school, I basically refused to work solely with artists, and I sort of began looking at patterns emerging in the museums of nature and science and ethnography, like anthropology museums, of how these museums were one of the earlier institutions who, without understanding or knowing what cybernetics are, they were already changing their strategy of mounting exhibitions and showing other cultures and nature to people in manners very reminiscent and very similar to ways that later on in the 40s and 50s were formalized as cybernetics. So that was my graduate project. I worked with the Museum of Natural History in New York. I developed a long text and an exhibition that sort of like dealt with the question of museum displays and how these were already moving towards virtual displays that we understand today in games and on the internet. But that was sort of like my work from 2010 to 2012. From 2012 to 2014, I was a recipient of 2.5 consecutive years of generous grants from Canada Council that then allowed me to further the question, but mostly in the world of humanities and art, sort of like asking what kind of changes these new technologies have had on the production of knowledge and on production of artistic sort of like forms or artistic practices. This resulted in a conference in Vancouver called Incredible Machines Conference, which Leonardo actually mentioned in my bio. It was a 2-day conference with many guests. Actually, some of those guests are become sort of like permanent fixtures of my practice. They've taught at the New Center. One of the keynotes that I brought to Vancouver was Reza Negarestani, actually, who gave a very fantastic lecture on sort of like similarities between not only humans, but also the entire biological system and technological systems, and how from certain angles we can look at human as a form of a machine. And that conference was sort of like, even though we only had a few guests in-house because the budget of the conference didn't allow to bring everyone to Vancouver, but I utilized the very same technology we're using right now, which is Google Hangout, in order to bring in a lot of people from different parts of the world to do presentations and responses. And it's sort of like 900 people watched it online live as it unfolded, just like we're live right now. It was a very different environment a little bit because the software has upgraded several times. Google Hangout has upgraded. It had a lot of hang-ups, actually, and a lot of problems, and it's much more smooth now. And that sort of like launched me into what I'm doing now. And basically, right after the conference, I was approached by a friend and a colleague, Jason Adams, who helped me with the conference, to develop the New Center and basically make what I did at the Incredible Machine Conference more permanent, and sort of like develop curriculum and seminars to be offered in an umbrella of a technical school, not a university or a grad school, to members of public who are interested to upgrade their knowledge. So that's how New Center came about. It's sort of like totally result of my theoretical and curatorial inquiries kind of developed into this form of practice, which is actually sort of like practicing what I was researching and putting into action. And now New Center this month entered its 5th year of operation. And this collaboration with Digital Earth is just like one of the many collaborations, more serious one, because it actually has some kind of form, and it's not a 1-day or 2-day conference. It's actually a 9-week engagement with all of you and those who are missing in the seminar right now. But really, a lot of it for me is about the question of like, how do we look at the changes that has occurred, and how can we develop a methodology through which we can say we have entered a new epoch. Are we in a new epoch now, or are we still or the world is still the same? You know what I mean? At what point you can call enough quantitative changes happen that we can qualitatively call it a new epoch, right? And basically, in the paper I wrote for my thesis show at the University of British Columbia, I categorized basically the development of not only the internet, but this thing that was still moving fast, which was the development of mobile phones, when you don't have to go to the internet, but the internet is already in your pocket. And sort of like availability of images and text online, like the Google Museum project was just launched, and how the interconnectedness between these systems, which later on, actually in 2014, Benjamin Bratton called planetary computation. I didn't have a word for it. Basically is basically the beginning of a new era, or like basically it can be considered as a point in how we're morphing from the modern era into a new era. And just to give you guys a clue, one of the most important art historians of the late 19th century, he never lived to see the 20th century, is Alua Regal. And this volume, which I absolutely recommend to all of you to find and read. Unfortunately, there is no PDF version of this online. And it's called Historical Grammar of Visual Arts. And from my notes, you see how extensively I've depended on this book for my work and research. And we've been trying to find a copy to share with you, but we've been so far not successful. Regal wrote basically in the late 19th century, and he died very early in the age of 47. And this book is basically a 10-session master level seminar on the structure of art history, which he gave twice with 10 years difference. So basically, it's like the same version of the book in 2 parts. It's like he repeats it 10 years later and updates it basically. And he's got an introduction which takes a minute to read, and I really would like to share this with you because I think very important, because it's a good clue as to how I look at things and how the question of interface and how the question of form and basic visual art can be configured with a question of history and time and these epochal changes. So Regal goes, I'm going to change my glasses because I think I need different level of glasses for this book.
Mohammad, what's the title of the book again?
The book is called Historical Grammar of Visual Arts.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
The interesting thing about the book is that even though it was written in 1890s and was available to German-speaking people immediately, the book didn't actually get translated until 2004 to English, and it was under the efforts of the lovely Flavio's with us. Okay, Flavio, I'm gonna like mute you until we get to your point, which is like not very far from now. Yeah, the book was only translated to English in 2004, which means like this knowledge was lacking in the English world, and those who were not aware of the book and those who did not speak or read German to go and read the book. So in a way, it kind of like opened a new interest in Regal's legacy in the English speaking work when this book came out. And it was only because of the efforts of Zone Books and the lovely translation of Jacqueline Jung that we actually have the luxury of reading this book. Otherwise, this book will be just not accessible to English-speaking people and not available to us. So I'll be quick. He goes, and understand, this is written in late 1900, and it has its own epistemological limitations that ties to the limits of what people knew and how people saw the world in 19th century. So in a way, reading this is not about endorsing it, but it's about sort of like seeing what we can extract from it to use it to understand our own time. So within knowable historical time, the understanding of man's relation to matter, which we simply call human worldview, has undergone two substantial changes. The history of visual art can consequently be divided into three major periods, which correspond in essence to ages already long applied in the fields of human political and cultural history. And he goes on to name those three, which is antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the modern era. And then he goes on to explain, to set like time period for them. And he goes, the first period encompasses all antiquity to the year 313, with the proclamation of Christianity as the official state religion in the Roman Empire. So the first period for him is sort of like from the beginning of time, or what we call antiquity, all the way to the proclamation of Christianity. Of course, this is very Eurocentric, no problem, but still we're trying to extract the method out of it. With the proclamation, okay. The second consists of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, strictly defined, up to 1520, with the death of Raphael and Pope Leo X. So between 313 and 1520, that period is what is the medieval era, right? The middle part, the Middle Ages. And then from 1520 to now is the modern era. But the most important part comes next. It need hardly be stated explicitly that the two above specified dates and three periods may not and shall not be held as absolute boundaries. Rather, within each age, we may distinguish three sub-periods. The first representing the development of the particular worldview. The second, usually the briefest, representing the worldview at its peak of perfection. And the third representing the process of its decline and eventual collapse. As a rule, this final sub-period provides as much insight into the subsequent worldview as that which it brings to a close. So basically what he's saying is like the period in which a worldview is on decline tells us more about the next one that's coming and we haven't even experienced than the one that is closing, right? So the declining period of the declining period of a paradigm is more important to the upcoming paradigm than it is to the existing paradigm that is actually kind of ending. Conversely, this is the even more important. These are two things that two kind of like theses as he put forth in this very brief introduction. Conversely, no obsolete worldview, once overcome, vanishes instantly from the face of the earth. So once a paradigm, or what he calls worldview, kind of like is in decline and is obsolete, it doesn't just vanishes from the face of the earth. Although it might not persevere as a deep-rooted conviction, it can, thanks to the pressure of tradition, continue to reverberate for centuries in outer forms. These forms play the most important role in the visual arts. So basically to simplify it is that the values and aspirations and practices of a dying paradigm sort of become superficial and come to the surface and become the form of the next and even the following paradigms. And that's why we can look at the surface of the society, whether it's art or it's architecture, to not only understand the current condition, but as a clue to the following one, but also definitely as a clue in the one in the past, because these past values and aspirations and practices are deposited on the surface, like a form of a skeuomorph. If you guys, those familiar with architecture and technology, understand the word skeuomorph, right? So this is sort of like the main question then, as I said it earlier on, is like, how can we sort of like understand our time, and can we actually say we're entering a new paradigm based on changes, rapid changes that the development of digital technologies, automation, artificial intelligence, algorithms have brought onto the world ever since the beginning of the cybernetic revolution. Now, to continue on, if, as Riegel suggests, all of human history from a linear perspective can be classified in these three periods, then the global social, cultural, and economic transformation that took place after the fall of Berlin Wall and the emergence of the post-9/11 order can be read as the decline of the last period, which is the modern period, and the beginning of a new age. Since these categories are not pure and don't begin and end one after another, as we learned, it is possible to speculate about the material history that is produced within their overlap as one era waxes and the other wanes. For Riegel, writing about emerging modern art in the late 19th century, Matisse, Picasso, and new developments in French painting were already the sign of the decline of the modern age. So and he gets into it later in the book, that like he sees the sort of like move away from realism and move away from historical painting towards abstraction in the late 19th century, totally as the early signs of this decline of the modern era that for him began in 1520. So already in late 19th century, for him, modernity and modernism is over. So it's very funny that like we actually call abstraction modern art, because Riegel thinks that this is the end of it. He sees this as a crisis of modernity as a political system, as a social system, but somehow we ended up calling that art modern, right? He saw abstraction as the crisis of a modernity in decline. Riegel's insight into the decline of the modern age is an early warning if we superimpose that timeline with three other trajectories for political economy, natural history, and the evolution of technology. It is more temporally precise to think of the beginning of the 21st century as the end of modernity, as it coincides with the irreversibility of the Anthropocene, the rise of machine intelligence, and the decline of national democracies and their corresponding Westphalian world order system, right? So somewhere between this long 20th century is where we can set, okay, when we can basically set that like hard border, right? But since we're too cool for hard borders, we're 21st century people, we're not like Regal in 19th century, right? We don't really want to like set a definite border and say, okay, it was Hiroshima. It was when we went to the moon. I don't know. It was one of those important things. It was the fellow standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square or whatever, right? You can just decide when is that line drawn between like end of modernity. But somewhere in 20th century, we went through this transformation where the modern era and Enlightenment was totally undermined, in decline, and all the political system, geopolitical system developed around it, sort of like were undermined, and it doesn't seem to be going back where it used to be in the good old days, right? Where countries had borders, where cultures had identity, when subjectivities were solid, when individuality was possible, all those like fruits of enlightenment, right? This anxiety that literally burns as a fire, right? And this fire is the fire of, I think, is the fire of the crises that finally is so obvious that it's so hard to ignore it, like Trump, like Brexit, like the rise of nationalism in Europe, right? And I can basically get a little bit deeper into it. I just wanted to like, I had this open and available, but somehow I closed my system to start and then I forgot to reopen this. Just give me one second. I also wanted to like introduce you my colleague and friend Flavio, who collaborated with me in writing one of the two texts that me and Patrick put forward. I basically wrote one of those texts with Flavio, and then I wrote the second part of it with Patrick. So Flavio, if you can just give a little bit of info about yourself and what you do and where you live, I'm going to quickly pull up my next little thing, and I'll be back. It's with you, Flavio. Just a second. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm a student of linguistics in Rome. I used to collaborate with the new center, and I'm interested in many different topics. Mostly, I was a Marxist. Now I won't define myself as a Marxist anymore, but kind of like post-Marxist Stirnerit. And I'm also interested in technology and evolution and other kind of topics like this. And I collaborate with on writing the article that Mo was talking about myth making and mythopoesis in politics. And I don't know if you read the article. There were several points that I tried to make with my article, with the article that I wrote with Mo, and
Fabio,
basically
we should wait, not get into the article, because I still have a little bit more to do, and then we talk about it. I just wanted to like occupy the time that it took me to pull up the next thing I want to like present on with you, so we're like not wasting the time. So yeah, okay. The next figure I wanted to talk about to you, and I basically send you the book in the email, is Gilles Châtelet. Gilles Châtelet was a mathematician and a philosopher whose work is very important for understanding the geometry. Basically, he's a geophilosopher, and in a sense, not geo in the sense that we understand geo as geography, but more like geometry. And basically, he's one of the people who tries to understand the Kantian ideas of the world and our understanding of the world and map it onto mathematics of geometry. And basically talks about how basically geometry as a foundation of our understanding of the world and our movement in the world and the way we relate to other entities in the world. But beside his contribution to mathematics and to physics in a way, and also he was a politician because for a while he served as a cultural attaché of France in Israel. He wrote this pamphlet before he ended his life in 1998 called "To Live and Think Like Pigs." And I send you the book, and I don't know if you had time to take a look at it. I absolutely recommend you go read that little pamphlet book from the beginning to the end, because he basically also is trying to understand what's going on. And for him, what we're dealing with the advent of the internet and with the advent of the sort of like popular computation is a sort of like a counter-reformation movement and counter-enlightenment. Because he basically claims that despite the emancipatory claims that internet and technology had in the 90s, he sees in the core essential qualities of these technologies the return of the monarch, the return of the sort of like the anti-democratic nature of the society. Basically, sort of like how if enlightenment was a move away from nature, natural law, and developing basically human, rationally based laws for people to relate to each other, he sees computation as a way in which mathematics is utilized to sort of like return the world back into nature. And basically, if not nature, a domestication process in which communication technologies will be used to turn populations into consuming, producing herds like cattle in the farm. And hence the title of the book, To Live and Think Like Pigs. But of course, for him, this process involves a lot more chaos than order. And the surface of this process is full of chaos, but the underlying logic of it is very much about a new regime of control that hides itself behind chaos and hides itself behind the chaos that for him originates in the way we look at nature and how nature was already chaotic to us. And then the technological world kind of like doubles up on this and simulates this chaos within itself and presents itself to humans as a chaotic world for which the only solution would be a Hobbesian kind of monarch or a Hobbesian kind of sovereign, a new Leviathan, basically. But I'm not going to like explain too much about the book. I already have summarized parts of the book, which I'm going to like go over. So according to the mathematician and philosopher Gilles Chatelet, the prehistory of our cybernetic age can be traced back to the natural philosophy of John Locke and the political thought of Thomas Hobbes, who originally saw the world as a closed system of statistical feedback loops. In his recently translated volume, To Live and Think Like Pigs, he highlights the affinities between postmodernism, the first-order cybernetics, and the pre-Enlightenment past of Europe. For him, the seeds of the counter-reformational fruits of our statistical society of feedback loops were sown centuries ago through Hobbes' fiction of the natural essence of monarchical rule and the sovereign's role in the domestication of the world's chaos. For Chatelet, this fictitious chaos has now been synthetically built into the very fabric of our global socio-political order as a Leviathan-like anarcho-mercantilism, like anarcho-capitalism. His own terminology for what we later come to understand as neoliberalism is this word called anarcho-mercantilism. Back then, they didn't say neoliberalism, back in the 90s. In Chatelet's descriptive and somewhat prophetic words, which I totally recommend you read, the main aim of cybernetic market democracy, much like the Leviathan, is to secure the place of the king and his knights, or in today's reality, the owners and a managerial professional class. According to Chatelet, this machine-aided owner and managerial class establishes its own domain through the mediating power of our main regulatory technologies of 1, the state, 2, the media, and 3, the capital. What he calls the tertiary state, or the three-legged state, or the three-sided state. Here lies the contradiction of our dominant cybernetic paradigm. Despite promoting itself as an open playing field and a neutral network of equal objects and flat forces, this system has more in common with the vertical politics of pre-Reformation absolutism. The control of the flows of information in various technosocial feedback loops allows this particular class that is in charge of these systems to constantly deprive the network by subjecting them to toll extraction in a never-ending entropy. The process is, of course, secured by the endless resources of nature as well as human population and their cognitive and technical abilities. So we're all feeding into this thing. If you recognize this nihilistic system, it is because it is another dimension of the hyperstitional process of capital through which power and knowledge might and right are unethically co-constitutive. So this is why I think the thought of Châtelet is very important, to think about what kind of world have we entered, or what kind of world we're about to enter. And I think maybe we're even only in the very beginning stages of it, right? Which hopefully will form the core of what people will be talking about in the seminar, each one from their own angle and each one from their own side. Now, basically, fast forward, because what I wrote you, and I'm going to share the link for the full article with you on the sidebar here, and you can maybe read it, is another text that was, it's like the link is very hidden, and this was actually published in a book called Reinventing Horizons. Basically, what became clear to a lot of us who were thinking around the election of Trump was that, again, a lot of people saw this as sort of like a switch between Democrats and Republicans, or a switch just like George Bush was. But for a lot of us, this could actually be the harbinger of a large epochal shift, which is basically roll things over and basically put a new direction to some inevitable changes that were going to take place, whether Democrats or Republicans or communists or whoever else also took over the American state as the largest superpower, right? Trump will give it its own trajectory or direction and his own flavor. But lots of these changes were inevitable, but it ended up being this kind of change and this kind of person in charge of these changes that are reverberating still throughout the world. And basically in this moment, the question becomes, okay, what would be the role of the progressive forces, whatever you want to call it, the left, the socialists, the liberals, even, right? How can we deal with the situation, especially when you think about what are the ways in which the right was able to utilize existing technologies and existing communication systems and existing media in order to sort of like take over the system. So the piece that me and Flavio wrote were basically a contemplation on ways in which this sort of like we go back to Gamergates, and we go back to like a little bit behind in sort of like the end of the Obama era, and try to trace back things that was already showing that the right is having the upper hand in the use of technology, and how left was basically unable to formulate its own response fast enough and early enough and strong enough. And that's why we end up where we are with like the alt-right and the whole 9 yards. Now, maybe it's a good time for Flavio to jump in and begin saying what he was planning to bring up. Go ahead.
I'm sorry if I was starting.
No, don't worry about it. Go ahead.
So, I mean, in the article that we were talking about, there's reference on the so-called Gamergate controversy that I think that some of you already know, because it was usually covered on media and TVs and journals. There were a lot of articles published on the topic. And so it started with video games, with this so-called issue of ethics in gaming journalism that was spread through the hashtag Gamergate in 2014. And it targeted two female video gamers, namely Brianna Wu and Anita and the video game critic Anita Sarkeesian, and because they were accused of being favored by gaming journalists for being progressive or having feminist views on video games. But I mean, the interesting thing about this phenomenon was not, of course, the fake ideas that were spread through this harassment campaign, but the coordination and the capacity of the right, of reactionary forces to mobilize around such issue. That, I mean, when the thing started, I think that everyone was thinking, oh, it's video games, it's just a minor issue, it doesn't have to do with the whole society. But there was a thing going on with the internet that some people noticed, that there was a shift, especially between 2012 and 2015, when internet started being viewed not as a progressive heaven, but as a sort of den of reactionaries and fascists. And 4chan, of course, was primary to this transformation of the internet. These attacks on the two feminist video gamers were coordinated through 4chan, which is anonymous, which allows people to not being identified when you attack or dox people. And it's basically, it doesn't have a form. You can organize anything on this. But I mean, like, was covered on various articles over and over again. The point that is important in this discussion is the extent on which the right was involved in myth making. It effectively created a myth around itself that was very effective. People started believing in it. It was a worldview that was not rational, didn't have a coherent ideas or concepts, but was efficient in conveying resentments and fears that a lot of people had in Europe and in the United States. And fast forward to 2015 and 2016, this strategy started to be implemented in politics, and people started talking about the so-called meme war and the alt-right and people that were surrounding Donald Trump. So in the article, I was asking myself, and of course we were asking ourselves, can the left use myth-making for its own purposes, for its own aims? And I presented an example of myth-making from a leftist perspective, but it comes from the 90s. It comes from the 90s in Italy, and it basically was a collective of people that call themselves Luther Blissett from 94 till 99.
The name is in the article, but maybe you can type it on the sidebar if people want to quickly look at things while you're talking. Yes, it will be useful. Thank you.
Yeah. So there was this Luther Blissett movement in the mid-90s in Italy that was started from radicals, from squatters and social activists who wanted to show how things are constructed through media and how basically you can attack the mainstream worldview not by exposing the truth, not by debunking and providing true claims for the untrue statements of the media, but by creating other fake news and spreading moral panic around media. That was what Luther Blissett was doing. It created fake events so that media covered them, that was coherent with the catastrophizing and sensationalist worldview of mainstream media. For example, in the late 90s in Italy, there was a craze, a sort of like witch hunt around black masses or something. And so they created a fake satanic worship ritual. They sent a VHS to a local newspaper, and the local newspaper started covering this event like for months. And after this, Luther Blissett came with a statement that it was fake and it was completely invented by Luther Blissett. Or, for example, on the 1999 Venice Biennale, Luther Blissett actually was two people from Luther Blissett.
There's something important about the 1999 Venice Biennale that for these artists, maybe it's a historical reference, that as people went from pavilion to pavilion, right, the NATO jets were flying over Venice to go bomb Yugoslavia. So it was like the war was present in the form of these flying jets, and the art crowd couldn't really like ignore it because it was above them. You could look up and see them. So you got to hear these airplanes and imagine them in your head when you're thinking of what Flavio is about to say about Luther Blissett. Go ahead.
Yeah. So these two artists created a fake exhibition of a so-called Serbian artist called Darko Maver that wanted to expose the crimes of Milosevic in 1999 in Serbia with a series of brutal photos of people being killed that were supposedly fake or just like exhibitions and creation of artists. And people bought into this stuff. They believed it was true. But after a while, I think after some weeks, the two artists stated it was fake, and it was created to present how the media was portraying the war in Serbia. The photos were taken from real life atrocities that were happening in Serbia from the site Roland.com. So they took some photos from a site. They exploited the fact that the people didn't know much about sources on the internet, and they used it as a way of exposing the fact that in war situation, communication warfare is incredibly important. That news spread ideas like myths. That basically in this situation, myth is much more important than any other truths. And this was on the Venice Biennale. But of course, as I mentioned, it was this whole Luther Blissett thing was permitted because the internet was primitive and people didn't know much about how it worked, how to get sources. It was it had kind of an anarchic vibe. But right now, since stacks have monopolized the internet in many ways, this kind of experiment cannot take place anymore. We have to seek perhaps new ways of creating myths for the left, for progressive forces, that it might be in some ways inspired by experiments like this, but in a different way, in a different and of course contemporary way.
I also think this, like, I mean, if we're talking about today, the space of meme warfare is almost closing off itself.
Yes, of course.
Just like how you know what I mean? Like basically there was no way for people to quickly do reverse image search on Google and realize these images are real news photos from atrocities and find out, right? But now if you do something like what Luther Blissett did, you can, within 3 minutes, you can say, oh, these pictures are from there, it's completely
immediately debunk it.
But I think the space of the meme warfare is also closing, not just because this technology is getting old, but because as I mentioned in the article, the lines are drawn very hard now. Ideological lines are drawn hard. You can only preach to your side. And this is true also for the right, not just for the left, right? So both sides are now wasting their time only maintaining their
boundaries,
maintaining their base, right, rather than expanding. So really, the question of myth making is also a technological question. It's not just like an idea of like, oh, I have this idea, I want to make myth, I'm going to make myth. You really need new technologies, new communication technologies, new methods of communication in order for myths of your time to actually be truly mythical. You know, I have tried not to talk so much about contemporary art and art in this session because we talk about art in the Thursday session, but it's inevitable. Like these days is very very fashionable these days in like press releases and exhibition descriptions. You hear like the artist is attempting to create new myths, the artist is creating new rituals, and you look at it and you go like, it's impossible because the capacity of white cube to produce myth is gone. White cube was amazing for myth making in the time of surrealists and Dada and constructivists. And that's why these myths held themselves so strongly in, if not in the mind of the population but in the mind of the artists and people who studied art and culture for about a century. We sort of like looked up to these moments as like very special mythical moments when, you know, when Picasso did this, when constructivists did that, when Dada and surrealists had their first show in Paris. The days of even white cube as a space of myth making is over, and we really have to expand our mind if we really want to engage in myth making today. We have to go beyond existing technologies, not because they're you can't make myth in it. But for myth to be called myth properly, it actually becomes myth after it's taken up by people, after it's believed in by many people. Otherwise, you're saying like, okay, I'm going to make a myth, does not create a myth. It actually has to have an impact on people before it can actually be considered a myth. So this is why it's very important for people involved with artistic and technological development that we're one of the group at the forefront of this question of is it crucial to engage in myth making? And the opinion of this 3 person who are sitting here as the co-authors of these 2 pieces, the answer to that is yes. But then the immediate question after that will be like, how can we utilize what we know, and what kind of tools do we need to produce? What kind of things we have to create in order to produce convincing myths, right? So it's about this conviction. Otherwise, I can write a 3-page press release and saying like, my practice is developing myth making, blah, blah, blah. It looks great on paper. It looks amazing even in the show. But like, is it actually producing myths? And who are these myths for? You know what I mean? Picasso and Matisse's myths were great for like many people for over generations, right? Are we able to compete? Can we have the myth making machines of our time? Now, in the article, what I was trying to point out was like how, you know what I mean? The reasons why right wing had the upper hand or continues to have the upper hand was they got into this technology of like anonymous groups like 4chan and meme making much earlier than the left, but also their ability to dare to blur the lines of truth and objectivity, and so like use a little bit of truth to create a lot of falsities and create a lot of like what they want people to think as truth or objectivity. So I think maybe we should pass the mic to you, right? Because I think the second part of the article, which I co-wrote with Patrick, kind of delves a little bit deeper into where was it and when was it that the left kind of decided to give up on myth making and go for like scientific objectivity as like the only way to move forward in the modern world. And so like, what are the ways to overcome that, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Flavio, you can stay on if you want, and we might need you, but if you absolutely have to go, you can leave anytime. Okay, I'm just going to mute you right now. And thanks again for your participation.
So I wrote so-called, let's say, an introduction to our position in the second text, and I'm going to read you that. And I'm trying to read it as academic as possible, meaning slow, so you can actually hear me. So the idea that history is linear, that the next level of societal progression is just around the corner, and that even a rollback to a non-progressive position can only be read as a monetary and maybe insignificant defeat is the fundamental mistake of many of our fellow leftists. But this is not a discussion on the cyclicality of history or an analysis of coming ascensions or collapses, or the unshackling of a hidden leftist archetype. This Promethean character is crucial in the fight against an even stronger right that is seemingly able to dismantle the previously unbreachable mountain castles of the left. A left that has abandoned its core principles of fighting for workers against harsh modalities of unemployment, social security, and other issues that it once saw as its foundation, was long undermined by third wayism and other neoliberal octopuses, you know, like these animals
that can change
alliance as fast as the wondrous sea animal, thinking the far right to be banished, never able to gain enough traction to overthrow them. The octopuses of the old parties and organizations failed to update their political playbook. So now I quote Roland Barthes from Mythologies. Politically, in spite of the universalistic effort of its vocabulary, the bourgeoisie eventually strikes against the resisting core, which is, by definition, the Revolutionary Party. Once of the left's near-forgotten core tactics, one of the left's near-forgotten core tactics is the ability to criticize the current states of affairs. But how can the left even think of engaging with its enemies when it does not know who they are? We know that there are a lot of dark precursors, a word from Deleuze, but we don't know. Yeah. We know that there are a lot of dark precursors out there, but we don't know which precursor leads to what outcome. In times of rapidly rising uncertainty, that sometimes manifests in a future shock that results either in depressed procrastination or infights, the time is over to concern ourselves if the left can or cannot meme. The right has won this argument just as a condor would win against a mouse. While the big birds of the right-wing politics are arguing which recipe they can use to cook us, we need to redevelop the skills of those we once allowed amongst our ranks, the tricksters. Because it is not the fox in Aesop's, because is it not the fox in Aesop's tale, John from the John and Old Master stories, or Robin Hood, much more akin to what the left has and should be? So, I will now quote Felipe Fernandez Armesto, because it is currently this anxiety of the future, the unpredictability of the future that creates hyperstitions, that creates the possibility of the right to win, because the left has enclosed itself in a counter-epistemic circle of its own, saying, this is the future. We know what the future is. The future is a progression on this linear path that we will always win, because future is progression, and therefore progressivism will win. And this is completely disenables the phenomenological system of young leftists who should be the ones who could refresh the movement. In no movement, the old ones, like the old neo-Nazis or the old Nazis or the old communists, could refresh it. It's always the young ones. But the adherence to reading Bakunin and to reading all these great, great authors is still the core problem. Somebody's ringing. Sorry. So that creates an anxiety, because we can't predict what will come tomorrow, and every prediction only comes with the failure of the prediction. All our prophets are not working. So we have an anxiety of the future on the left. So Felipe Fernandez Armesto said, popular anxieties about the uncertainties of the future procured by rapid change are not merely the issue of ignorance, rather they are symptoms of a world in the grip of future shock. So we are shocked of the future. We can't act responsively to a future that is yet to come. So we have to actualize our epistemic system, our core modality, in able to look and prognosticate what the future could be.
So get back to the article and talk about that surrealist moment a little bit, of how surrealists were basically, probably we can say, or early surrealists, because Dali ended up becoming a right-wing person anyways, right? But the rest of the surrealists, like André Breton and those guys, were arguing in the Communist Party about the importance of myth and how this debate kind of like ended against myth making and against stories, and went for sort of like a objective scientific Marxism rather than blending it with something more creative.
Yeah, it was. I want to come to that right now, and it is André Breton called for myth making, but he was like one of the last ones who said myth making is
from the left.
Yeah, from the left. Myth making from the left is the way to go. But a lot of the leftists in the 30s and the 20s were against myth makings. So I quote Harold Rosenberg, who was a famous art critic, who responded to Breton, and he didn't respond to him just like to anybody. He responded to that guy as if you would respond to a child, to somebody who gives you a thought that is immediately dismissible.
Like patronizing.
Yeah, completely patronizing. He said, to be free, man must be free of all myths. Better get rid of these mystifications, myths, initiations, rites, both positive and negative, and devote yourself to the science of practical politics, to everyday affairs. This clearly comes out of a misreading, a complete misreading of Marx. Because Marx said that religion is the cry of the oppressed creature. But he also said there is, if you have we are still in the time that needs illusions.
So do you have the quote by Marx?
Yeah. He said, this is like the famous, always misquoted text. Like it's misquoting Marx about the opiate of the people is actually a right-wing mythopoesis that works so good that nearly nobody ever read the text. So what is really crucial in that text is not that opiate of the people thing, but it's
that religion is the opiate of the people.
Yeah, the really important thing is that he says, first of all, first quote, the critique of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism. But criticism is not utopian. Its criticism is a way to change the present to create a future. It's not about creating and destroying everything in the moment, in the now, without having anything beyond. Because Marx says that the illusion has a psychological necessity of the people. It is the false flower, he calls it. It is in all of that. So what he then says is very crucial to us. He says the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. It is the demand for their real happiness. You just don't destroy the illusion. You first have to build something that the people can then go to. It's like, yes, we need workers' rights. We need 10 hours workday and something like that. So then he says to call on them to give up their illusions about the condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusion. So it is a call to dismantle a position where you have to have something in the afterlife. So you want to say, let's engage against vaccination because they are somehow evil. I read that on my chakra
vaccination.
Vaccination. My chakra therapist told me that. Let's go to Reiki. Well, whatever. All these counter-epistemic, New Age stuff that you can use to lose your time and not engage in real political struggle. so coming back to the trickster. The trickster is a position that the left has to develop, but the trickster can't be any trickster. We can't have an unconditional tricksterism inside the left, because that will not work. An unconditional trickster would basically say GMOs are bad. And then you have people in the Philippines not getting golden rice, which is an amazing project that puts more iron than zinc in the rice, so people will not get will not starve. But nationalist movements, like the first big time burning of GMO crops, was not done in a leftist country. It wasn't done in Hungary. It was done in nationalist, back to the grassroots, back to our earth movements. Yeah, it was in Europe, like Austria, like conservative movements want a clean and purified nature. And the left, who thinks like, oh my God, we have to engage with that, it's not a left. It's not a leftist thought to think about back to nature. The left, it has always been, if you just look at Russia during the first years of communism, the left has always been on the forefront of technological revolution. The right has always taken on technological revolution,
rejecting it and going for nature.
Absolutely. And after it sees that it has to play that game, it takes it on. Just like the Nouvelle Droit first was not existent in the right. They didn't like it. And now Nouvelle Droit, the new right, is the modus operandi of the right, taking on identitarian politics and using it.
To develop white identity politics.
Yeah, white identity politics, and using tactics from starting from people like Walter Benjamin, that all people on the left always said, oh my God, no, he's one of us. Yeah, but Leo Löwenthal, a colleague of his, said it's so problematic. This can be read from the right. This can be read to the right.
Benjamin can have a purpose for the right wing as well.
Absolutely.
If they want to.
Even in his core text that everybody has to read in their MA or BA studies, the one about the technological reproduction, his friend, his colleague in the Frankfurt School said it's very problematic.
Well, didn't fascists just implement that?
Yeah, they just implemented that. It's the whole line of movements. If you take that text and you look at Leni Riefenstahl's film about the Nazi Party,
it's totally Benjaminian.
It's completely Benjaminian. It's like everything you see in that film. You just have to destroy the wall that they built in the university behind, and link that to, and you're like shocked. There was a reason why Benjamin was never in the inner group of Adorno, Löwenthal, and Horkheimer, but there's a big reason.
Because they knew his stuff could be read either way.
He also, as a literary critic, he never read any of the big avant-garde poetry or stuff. He engaged with populist, day-to-day literature.
But that's also his strength.
That is also his strength, but he was always interested in populism. He was always interested in populism.
You know that there's this opinion out there that true knowledge does not have a political side, and true and pure knowledge is apolitical, and it's about who jumps in and politicizes it and gives it direction first, that then kind of like gives the new knowledge its political orientation. So it's always about who jumps to the new technology, who jumps to the new thing first and tries to use it for their political purpose. So you can also read it that way rather than slamming Benjamin.
No, I don't want to slam Benjamin. I just want to show that it is possible, just like because the Nouvelle Droit is this French right-wing movement. that has now infected, let's call it infected, every right-wing movement
around the world. Or, I mean, there might be some left who are still like completely, we are this race and this race, but now they're more like nationalistic and we build alliance with other nations. But like they copied Gramsci and stuff like that. So, and a lot of the people inside of the left and the small leftist organization don't want to see that. They don't want to look at the right as a novel droit, right? They still want to call it the fascist right. The magically all the Nazis stood up from the graves and came back, and now they are standing and voting for Trump. It's not somebody else. It's not like an actualized. No, it's something that we already know from the past.
But no, they are still just like us, because we never updated our playbook, and now we can call the Nazis. You're a Nazi, you're a Nazi, you're a Nazi. But it just doesn't work, because Trump is winning. In Austria, the fascists won. Like that, actually, neo-Nazis are sitting in party positions in Europe. And there is a lot of stuff going on, and have to update your playbook.
Maybe to explain this, let's get back to the other term called necropoesis.
The necropoesis.
And what is the difference between mythopoesis and necropoesis? I mean, some of it is written and described in the text already that we provided you yesterday, but because we want these texts to stay with us and not just for the first session, we want to talk about them and ask you to read them and contemplate on them, and hopefully try to extract some kind of methodology out of it for the group project we'll be doing together. So so let's talk about why do we think what left engages mostly when it is trying to do mythopoesis, it end up being non-mythopoesis and something completely opposite.
That's what we termed necropoesis, which is basically to just say we're going to make a parade in the city, like a May parade, and suddenly that's going to change something. Let's make an art exhibition with 5 videos, all of them 8 hours long, showing how evil the right wing is. And then, wow, only 3 people who weren't participating in the project looked it up. And then said, no, I'm still voting conservative.
So definitionally, though, what we refer to is as trying to give a new life to old ideas. Hope to bring something from the past, and by restaging it, somehow this is going to somehow help to sway minds. But most of the time, it ends up backfiring, because if it does not have a new strategy, if it does not have new ideas, and if it certainly does not use new methods and new technologies, it ends up only satisfying the already converted. And it would never, even when it's successful, it never goes beyond the mind of those who already are committed to this approach to begin with, right? So for me, this is how I distinguish between mythopoesis and necropoesis. And necropoesis is basically not taking risks. And if you don't, with no risk, there's no future. So if it does not involve taking risk, if it does not involve new ideas, and if it does not involve new methods, something that actually their mere newness will make people pay attention, is necropoesis. If you see it and you immediately think of things you already know or strategies you've already seen deployed, it's already not working. It only works if through encounter, the person encountering would say, holy shit, or oh my God, what is this? Oh, I've never heard this, or I've never seen this. So if it lacks that, you're already treading in like wrong waters. So for me, this is how I distinguish between the two, right? And there's many, many examples of that, right? Like most of the meme warfare of the left, for me, falls into that, even though some of them are funny, but they merely go beyond the turf. So this risk taking is crucial to producing new mythological realities.
I would even go as far as to say that without an epistemological foundation, that you can't create mythopoesis. A tricksterism without epistemological foundation can only create
counter-epistemic.
Yeah, and that is necropoesis for the left, because the right has no problem in creating falsities and lies. It's populist.
But for us who are committed to true progress, we need to begin from a sound and epistemic position, but we know how we deviate from it. And what kind of results do we expect when we deviate from objectivity towards something that will be more effective and powerful, right? We have that responsibility. The right does not have a responsibility like that. That's why it's okay if they screw up, because screw up is their method and their identity. But for us who are on the right side of history and who wants to maybe push the history in that right direction, we necessarily have to begin from an epistemic ground and then know how to deviate from it for the effect.
Yeah,
right?
It's just like, if I can give two politicians as examples, Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. The right wing will never say, "Oh my God, she lied there. The minors and the food for the school children, that was atrocious. There were a lot of lies in that." No, they gained something from it. It was good. We are already in the ivory tower of conservatism, and if you lie to the masses, it's okay. Yeah, but who has ever forgiven Tony Blair? No, you can't forgive Tony Blair.
Because he was on the left.
He was on the left. He can't do that. He's with the masses. He can't lie to the masses. He went against the core foundations of the left,
which was lying about the Iraq war and dragging England into the Iraq war. He will never be forgiven. Whereas Thatcher is already forgiven, even though she even made more blatant lies.
If he never lied to the populace, you would have a Corbyn already in office. I'm just saying that prognostication.
The problem here wasn't, again, the lie, but what he put the lie in the service of.
Yeah, but that also was a big lie. It was not like a small lie that was mixed with a lot of knowledge and facts. It was a lie that was built on a heap of lies that would in the end only bring a downfall. It was not an ascendation. It was built to produce a downfall. It was pure neoliberalist politics. It was for the next 5 or 3 years, and then after that, I don't care. I'm no longer in office. Goodbye. Because the left has to operate differently than the right. It has to work in the long run. It has to work on an epistemic foundation, while the right wing just is there to undermine this foundation, and it can do this every time. So the left has
more restricted hand.
Yeah, also more restricted hand, but it also has the necessity to come up with an epistemic. That's like the conundrum, the difficulty. But if you overcome a difficulty, you always come out stronger, most of the times, at least in philosophy. Only in philosophy, not in, like, if I cut off my hand.
But actually, this is what interesting, because, you know, like, you guys being artists, the question is always research-based, right? So the assumption is, if you're research-based, right, somehow you have to produce like scientifically sound art. But we're also here to say that that's not necessarily the case, right? Your research is your epistemic ground. But how you deviate from this research and what you do with this research is what actually is going to make the true art, or what we consider like effective art that will have an impact, right? Now, we're getting close to like only having 20 minutes left. I think it's good to open up and see if you guys want to like participate or have some comments. I see most people are sort of like off, but I'm hoping that you're still in the class and you're participating. So it will be great to open it up. Any of you would like to talk? It will be interesting to hear you. Jeremiah, do you want to talk, or was that just a stretching, or it was like you want to talk? Please unmute yourself.
I think it was more a stretch, but I've been following the class, and I think it's pretty interesting how you bring to light things that you would see as the norm, you know, with the idea that the right got to use social media dissemination first. With the, I think that's pretty interesting. I would assume that the left built these machines, but
well, that's not how it played out in the last at least decade, right?
Yeah. From your present, I read the two presentations we were sent earlier, and then I could follow the class.
You know, left was much more in control when we were in the realm of like websites and maybe blogs and maybe like first 5 years of Facebook, right? It looked like a very liberal environment. The internet was a very liberal environment, very progressive environment, right? And it was very much in line with like the leftist progressivism. But when we entered this zone of like internet 3.0 or 2.2 or something, you know what I mean, with the proliferation of cell phones and other social media, right? Especially like groups like anonymous group chats like 4chan, I think things sort of like started to change. You know, like Reddit and 4chan had a lot to do with how they basically allowed this rapid dissemination of links and short opinion to kind of like be mobilizing technologies of the right-wing opinion, which was scattered and was afraid of coming out, because they thought of themselves as isolated. They saw the mainstream media and the world of internet all controlled by like left, and they never saw themselves able to come together. But somehow these newer social media and technologies allowed them like a place to kind of like call their own, and they did utilize that very effectively.
One question I have though is, you say that once you look at a project, an artistic project, and you can already think about it, or you can already associate with it, then it's old or it's not effective. Is that what you mean?
Well, I see a lot of art, right? It's just my job to go and look at art and write about it and think about it. But like let's look at the last Berlin Biennale as an example of what we just talked about, right? And this sort of like came in a review that me and Patrick wrote about the Biennale for the platform Ocula. And if we find the link, if you find the link and send it to me, I'll share it with a sidebar note. Basically, the Biennale was curated by South African curator, our friend Gabby, and included a lot of African artists, but also African diaspora in Germany and other parts of Europe. More than 90% of the artists in the Biennale were women, were Black women, they were African women. And the experiment was very novel, because what she was doing was bringing artists from the South, bringing artists from Africa together, but encouraging them to not make identity art about their identity, and saying like, just the fact that you're African is good enough. Do what you want to do. Don't make art about your background or your identity, right? But it was like it was really hard. Why? Because the artists this is the first time ever that somebody tells them you're allowed into an international forum, but you don't have to address your identity. So, but how can they do that when all they've done in the past is to just reiterate this, right? And on the other side, the audience were not educated. So the audience every time they saw the smallest thing about blackness in the work, they said, oh, this is about identity. Because that's all they knew how to read, right? So the works that really transcended in the exhibitions were the ones that sort of the artists, whether consciously or unconsciously, created ways in which for this audience who wasn't trained in knowing that, okay, I'm looking at African art, but this is not about identity, to actually immediately go beyond the familiar and categorizable, which was identity, and try to see that which the artist actually planned to do. And those were the successful works in the show, which basically they did not either refer to the identity at all, or they knew how to use it only as the first hook, that even the untrained eyes of the German audience, who would all are there to only see identity, were able to go immediately past identity, go like, no, this is not about identity, this is actually about something else. Something much more interesting than something we already know for the last 20 years, which is sort of like the artists from a periphery talking about their own conditions. So you know what I mean? You can't really you can't really say just all unrecognizable things are good or all recognizable things are going to fall into like unimportance, right? So it's up to you to somehow create that moment of magic that, boom, things change all of a sudden. Yeah. So any more questions? We still have 15 more minutes. I mean, there's so much paperwork and talking about stuff that we can fill up the 15 minutes really easy. But I would like to hear you speak a little bit. And next classes, the tradition of you guys speaking will grow because people have presentations and responses and all that, and that will generate even more. So anybody else wants to comment? Because if you don't, then I'll put you on spot. So you better like say something.
Because then we go from left to right or
yeah,
right to left.
I don't know if you can see me. I
yes, we can see you perfectly.
Yeah, no, it's just that it's more of a comment because I read the text before the class, and then you kind of reiterated those things throughout the presentation. And especially I think when you said that we need myths again, or like, are we able to create something that competes with Picasso and other guys? And I think this is when I realized that I think it's a very problematic, I mean, I understand this kind of Sehnsucht, you know, like this kind of longing for a myth or like for a model or for something that we can relate to or something that can explain or lead forward. But I think the problem with myths and the models was that they were extremely exclusive, right? And then like if we look at the whole history of 20th century and like history of feminisms and attempts to queer histories, so this was exactly the demystification of things, just because the myths are so exclusive. So, and this is why and one of you mentioned, like, let's say the early Russian Revolution, and of course there is this great myth of a communist revolution, but it was made of rivers of blood, you know. So that's extremely problematic. And also throughout the talk, I thought of media archaeology as a new discipline, and basically media archaeology is very interesting for artists just because artists can create the alternative histories or inhabit alternative temporalities. And I think this is exactly like, this can be the myth making that you're talking about. Maybe you think of a bigger scale of those myths, but then again, it's a very fine line between, you know, like creating a propaganda or like an idea that people follow. And I don't know if what I say makes sense, or is it clear?
No, absolutely, it makes sense. But you know what I mean? Rather than respond to you, I want to hear other people speak, and then there will be plenty of room and time to talk about this on the classroom and other places, because I don't think I disagree with a word of what you said. So that's why I think maybe like an immediate response is not even like productive. But yes, but just to say maybe one sentence is that just because the myth of the modern art was exclusive to white European men doesn't mean our myths of the 21st century has to be that way, has to be configured that way. Or just because the mythologies of the modern era were mass produced and mass consumed doesn't mean the mythologies of today need to be produced and disseminated in the same scale or same manner, right? But I think maybe that's just like a good sort of like response and agreement with you to leave the time, the 10-minute left or 20-minute left for others to speak a little bit, or actually 10 minutes left, or 11 minutes. Go ahead, Umber.
Sorry. Is it possible that I respond like to what Asia was saying?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So I completely
just let us see your mouth by changing the camera a little bit. Yes.
Better? Thank you. Okay. I completely agree with Asia, and like those were similar thoughts that I had throughout the talk. Was that fine line between, specifically what you said, Asia, was between myth making and state propaganda. And I think in particular, I'm interested in that within my own practice, because I kind of unpack kind of moments of state propaganda that exist, for example, in Urdu literature or poetry. It's like very nuanced moments, and that also goes to the idea of scaling you were speaking of, like that moment of dissemination, whether it's the larger myth-making narrative or mechanism that Mohammad then is speaking of, or in these smaller moments of within problematic memes, or within the language and poetry and certain aesthetics in like kind of a one-to-one scale exchange. So kind of not only I mean, it was outlined in the discussion, but like not only should we think of like when we are making, like what is the content of these myths, but more of like the framework and dissemination of these myths. I think I'm more aware of, I'm more interested in that, or like honing in on that kind of.
I think again, I completely agree with you, but my word of response, but also is a reminder, is that as long as we are committed to an epistemic ground, I think that would save us a lot from propaganda. And that means, I mean, Reza will get into it next week, right? A little bit more. But what is this condition? This condition is like your ideas are always up to reversal, always up to being rejected. If experience or new data coming in shows that they're wrong, right? So you don't hold anything as absolute truth, in the sort of like in the sort of as your method, right? So you're open to new information, you're open to new knowledges, and you're willing to update or abandon what you thought was your ground. That is really the basis on which you can make sure that you can save yourself a lot from falling into the pitfall of propaganda, because your base from which you're deviating in your own mythologies is sort of like the closest thing that comes in a human ability to truth, right? So why, if you're committed to that ground, then there's there's limits on your ability to actually move totally to the other side, which is other side of myth, which you guys identified as propaganda. Which propaganda begins with like a closed system of like, this is what we're trying to achieve, what we need to do, and lies we need to say, and distortions we need to do in order to get there, right? This is why we deviate from using that famous word called hyperstition, because we think hyperstition is not committed to an epistemic ground. Hyperstition is sort of like there. So yeah, even though myth making can be considered hyperstitional, but not every hyperstitional activity is myth making.
I actually have a good quote from Crow. You know, like the cybernetic research.
CCRU.
CCRU, yeah. So the quote is, Pipe actually makes things happen and uses belief as a positive power. Just because it's not real now doesn't mean it won't be real at some point in the future. And once it's real, in a sense, it's already been.
It's always have been real.
Yeah, which in a way is exactly what George Sorel said 60 years before that, because he said we are perfectly aware that the historians of the future are bound to discover that we labored under many illusions. And then he goes on to basically make the same point. But that just shows that after that that there is a cyclicality in also in thought, and you have to go back to our antediluvian thinkers and try to actualize and modernize some of their thoughts and bring them into the technicality of a present.
Yeah, and also I think this is where, you know what I mean, like where I draw the line. I mean, we're not calling for the abandonment of science, of the social sciences or humanities and their commitment to objectivity. We're not calling to abandon, like the right-wing people who think like God created the world in 6 days and environmental sciences are useless and that climate change is a lie. Like we're not calling for that, but it is actually we're saying that it is the role of the artist and those who involved in the production of culture to sort of like not try to bound themselves by the sort of like the objectivity standards of our sciences. And this is another conundrum developed in the last 10 years under the research-based work, right? Because so the research-based work doesn't mean that now we're all like scientists committed to objective truth. The commitment of the artist should be to form and to metaphor and poetry in the last instance, regardless of how much you're basing your work on objective research that would overlap with the work of psychiatrists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, anthropologists, all sorts of like social scientists, or those who engage in scientific research for their artwork, you know what I mean, with biologists, with chemists, with physicists. In the last instance, our loyalty should be to the development of new forms and new forms for the propagation of ideas that are lacking in the culture. Really. So this is sort of like, and I mean, I'm not saying that every single lecturer in the series we put together agrees with me or believe in this, because we put together a rainbow of people. But I personally, as someone who practices art, who practices in the world of culture making, I strongly stand behind these words that like my commitment is to form and to poetry in the last instance, not to objectivity of my research, which my forms and my poetic practice comes from naturally, if that makes any sense. Anybody wants to add? We're reaching sort of like to the last few minutes of the seminar, and I don't mind doing some housekeeping in the last few minutes, which is sort of like these notes will be available to you on the classroom. We will form a spreadsheet that would put all these commitments for every session together. Give us a couple of days for that. But those who said they're going to present next week and all that, they remember, and they better remember, because these 2 days might be crucial for their ability to read and make notes and all that. And in between, always feel, if you forgot something, email us, email me, email Razwan, who's like the student admin person. Yeah. If you forgot something, if you needed a file, if you couldn't access a hard drive or anything, we're always there, almost on a 24/7 shifts, because News Center is both in America and in Europe. So somebody might even answer you at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. because that would be like afternoon in America. And yeah, and if you're the other side of the world, somebody might answer you from Europe, because we're awake and up when America's sleeping. So yeah, so any final comments you guys have? I hope you...
One question, please.
Yes.
I can't seem to find the Reza's
essay.
Reza's document for next week, the one
it was emailed to you, but I will reshare it again. I will resend all the emails right after the class ends to everyone.
Okay.
And I will try to add them manually to the classroom too, just the next week one, and make sure, because I'm contacting Razwan right after the class, to make sure that the folder in the classroom works. And guys, remember, there are 2 classrooms. One is for the art and one is for the theory, right? And maybe you were looking in the wrong one. That's why you didn't see the files. So I'm going to make sure that those 2 are clearly marked with clear like indicators, and you have access to both of them by tomorrow it'll all be set and fixed. And as these people we're bringing into the seminars provide us with the title of their talk, the brief description of their talk, and their associated images and text, we upload them in those folders and make them available to you. Okay, any final comments?
Other than that, I could give read one of my
okay, maybe we do that for the closing.
Yeah.
There's 1 more minute left.
Yeah, so I'll give you because my opposition of myth is not, let's say, a lot of things can be myths that you normally don't think that could be myths. So I'll read the last statement.
Is it a quote or is yours?
It's my last sentence that I wrote. The left adheres to its own perpetual wheel of myth-making. A myth that tells them that somehow by saying we are leftists, while staying passive when it comes to worker rights, can somehow win the fight against the right, that has cloned the most populist statement the left had to offer, anti-capitalism. Because that is something the Nouvelle Droit is completely in line with. Like Alain de Benoit, the key thinker of the Nouvelle Droit, actually says, if you're only talking about immigration and not about capitalism, then you're not really right-wing, because it's both.
So you're saying anti-capitalism now is a project of the right?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't even say they created the myth that they stand against capitalism. That's one of the most dangerous things they have accomplished. That people will now say, I don't need to go to the right way, the left wing, if I'm against capitalism. I don't like these immigrants, and I don't like capitalism, and they got both. Well, actually, they're all in line with big-time capitalism and big-time factory owners and all of that. But still, it's a myth. It works. It is a story that gets told and retold, and a left that adheres to its own. I call it a room of mirrors that doesn't let any outside information in, will still think, no, but we are the anti-capitalists. That's our thing. Yeah, what those people over there, these right-wing people, are saying, it's crazy. Don't even listen to it. We don't even have to think that to change a program. But that's our own myth. Like everybody, like Wilhelm Flusser wrote, that when I sit at home and I listen to the wind outside, I think that it tells me a story. I know it's counter-epistemic, but it's a myth of my own making. So we all adhere to some kind of myth. So it's like if you cook, you know when you go to a restaurant if the dish is good or bad. So a perpetual myth-making practice keeps you safe from the myths of the right wing. Because you say, no, that follows that. I would have done this myth a little bit better, but it's a myth. I see it. Mm-hmm. It's developing a practice of myth making. You don't have to put it outside.
Okay, so 8:33, we're 3 minutes into the session. I think we started 3 minutes late too. So yeah, so thanks again for the first session. See you everyone next week. Don't forget we begin 2 hours early, right? So we're going to begin not at 6 p.m. European time and noon EST, but 4 p.m. European time and 10 a.m. AST. And I think in China, it'll be 10 p.m. rather than midnight, right? Yeah, so see you everyone next week. We will have Reza Negarestani in the house. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh, and then the live video, we post the video also to the classroom. So if you want to go back and look at it, it's going to be there in the classroom.
All right, bye.
Thanks, bye.